welcome to this episode of The Art and Design of Sci-Fi and Fantasy, Mystery and Horror. Today, I speak with Dr. Gabriel Eljaiek Rodriguez. I think I messed up his last name a little bit, but he's written on Latin American horror cinema, contemporary horror cinema from about the 90s to about present day, 2016-17. Thank you and enjoy. I'm speaking with Dr. Gabriel Eljaiek Rodriguez, author of The Migration and Politics of Monsters in Latin American Cinema. Thank you for speaking with me.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me.
So first, can you tell me how you got into studying this subject and writing about it?
Yeah, this is something that I have been interested. I mean, this could be like a commonplace, but this is something that I have been interested since I was a little kid. I have been interested in monstrosity and horror films and things like that. And then when I came to the United States to do my PhD, I discovered that it could be an academic topic. So I decided to start working not only on the cinema, but also into Gothic literature and Gothic literature in Europe and the United States, but also in Latin America. So, I mean, this is something that I have been working since I was a grad student, and then it became kind of like a topic that I'm revisiting constantly and that I'm working with constantly.
Mm-hmm. So, where in Latin America did you grow up?
I grew up in Bogota, in Colombia. I lived 25 years in Colombia before I came to the United States, to Atlanta.
And so when you were growing up, what was the cinema that you were exposed to? Was it a lot of American cinema, or was it more Latin, or what was the mix?
It's a little bit of everything, you know. Bogota, it's a city that attracts a lot of cinema from many different places. It's a city that you can find cinema festivals from the United States, of course, but also from Europe, from Russia. You can find like maybe more like continental kind of cinema festivals, but also sometimes you find like cinema festivals by country, even by region in different countries. So it's a city that you can find a lot of cinema. So I was exposed to cinema from many different places since I was very young. So it's something that I have been, again, interested since I was very young.
And was this material dubbed or translated to Spanish, or were you watching it in original languages or different languages?
Normally, you watch it in the original language with subtitles. Colombians, they don't have any particular feelings about other languages, and because, for example, like Spaniards, they really like to dub the films, but in Latin America, most of the times you find the movies in the original languages with subtitles. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's like a very common practice. And for example, when, like, I don't know, when you're having a Russian cinema festival, for example, part of the attraction of the cinema festival is the possibility to listen to another language and learn a little bit about the culture.
Mm-hmm. And I ask all those questions because one of my sort of side interests is how interest in any kind of speculative fiction, you know, horror, fantasy, sci-fi, how it's sort of consumed produced and consumed in countries outside of the, you know, English-speaking Western world, you could say.
No, and that's I think that's something that in Colombia specifically and Latin America in general is something that it's a region that it have been always very open to cultural products from many different places. Sometimes not so much. I mean, depending on the country, you see that there's like more or less opening to the actual people, but it's a region that it have always been consuming products from many different places. So obviously, one of the main influences is the United States, but you can find cinematic influence or literary influences from many different countries. No, I remember talking with one of my friends from grad school, and he grew up in Cuba, and we discovered that some particular Soviet cartoons that he grew up watching that only were broadcast in the Soviet Union and in Cuba, for some weird reason ended up being broadcast in Colombia as well. So you sometimes you find like these weird interconnections, no, and this weird consumption of products that you will think that it will not have like the possibility to reach so far. But it's really interesting, and I grew up with a lot of these, no, a lot of these cartoons from the United States. No, I remember watching Scooby-Doo, Where Are You, when I was younger, Japanese manga, and a lot of cultural products that kind of like inform my perception and my approach to popular culture. And obviously you get products from Latin America as well. No, I mean, Mexico, it's a powerhouse when it comes to popular culture in Latin America. And the other Latin American countries, we consume a lot of Mexican products. So it goes in multiple ways, I will say.
Okay. So tell me then about the book.
The book is basically a study on Latin American horror films. And contemporary Latin American horror films, and how these films are reflecting and are talking about specific political situations in different countries of the continent. So in some way, it's something that I have been seeing in many years that I have been researching and teaching about horror. Like this power that horror has to be very political without apparently being, you know, like sometimes people don't see horror as a very political genre. So part of what I'm trying to show is like, I mean, obviously I'm not the only one or the first one. I mean, this is something that the theorists in horror have been trying to show since a long time ago. But I mean, my point is that in Latin America, it's especially significant. You can see it in many films, horror films specifically.
So when you say contemporary, can you tell me the range, sort of the years that you're looking at then? You know, how far back you go?
Yeah, I mean, the most of the movies that I'm working with are from the maybe mid-90s to this specific moment, 2018 or 2017, 16. But I have a couple, maybe one Cuban film that is from 1985. Probably that's the oldest one that I'm working with. And obviously I'm referencing some more older, maybe 60s, 70s films from Latin America because the production, the horror cinema, in Latin America, the production is not insignificant, but it's obviously not as big as the American production, for example. So a lot of directors are connecting all the time with productions that happen in the 60s or in the 70s. So yeah, the movies that I'm focusing on basically are from maybe mid-90s to the contemporary time.
Do you focus on movies that did well in the box office or were popular, or do you delve more as well into maybe unknown, even in Latin America, things that were not so well known?
I'm trying to cover a little bit of both, I will say, because for example, I work with some films by Guillermo del Toro. That, I mean, he's like one of the biggest names in Latin American horror and in horror in general. But I'm also working a couple of films that are like very unknown, kind of like they are very unknown, but they already have a little bit of like a cult status. So yeah, I think that the movies, let's say that a big number of the movies that I'm working with are movies that are fairly known in Latin America. But in the extremes, I have Guillermo del Toro in one side, and in the other side, I have these cult films. That a couple of them are really, really low budget, but represent many of the very artisanal films, let's say, that sometimes appear from time to time in different countries of Latin America.
Mm-hmm. And how many of these films made it outside of Latin America, shown in non-Spanish speaking countries, would you say? How common is that?
It's not uncommon, but it doesn't happen. It's not uncommon, but it's not something that happens all the time. For example, there's one of the films that I work with. It's called the Mexican, it's a Mexican film. The original title is Somos lo que hay, We Are What We Are. And this film, it had a remake in the United States. Mm-hmm. Maybe 2 or 3 years after the Mexican version, it had a remake in the United States. But it was with the help of the Mexican director. And also, some of these films, they made it to the American audiences. And obviously, when we are talking about Guillermo del Toro, obviously we are talking about a global author, not a global filmmaker. Mm-hmm. But yeah, some of these films, for example, there's a couple of Colombian films that at some point the Variety magazine, they were informing that maybe there will be like remakes, American remakes, and that Hollywood was looking into buying the rights and things like that. But I'm talking about a movie from 2007, and we still don't have an American version of that. So some of these films are known outside Latin America or outside the countries, but it's not something that is happening so much. It's still something that happens from time to time. Mm-hmm. And also, I think it also has to do with the fact that some of these films, they are well received, some of them in Latin America, but it's not that they are also like breaking record of assistance, or they have the enormous audiences in Latin America.
Right.
That's part of the issue, that in Latin America still people consume a lot of horror films, but people's audiences are a little hesitant to watch horror films made in their own countries. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So looking at how they express monsters and monstrosity in Latin America, how is it similar and different to how it's done, say, in the U.S.?
Mm-hmm. Something that I work in the book is the place of Latin America and of colonial Latin America in relation to Europe first, and then to the United States. This place of monstrosity, like since the arrival of the European conquerors, America was the place of America, the continent, was the place of the wondrous, the place of the monstrous. Mm-hmm. So, during many, many years, this was like the status that the continent had. Then, it changed a little bit, but part of what I'm trying to say is that some of these directors of contemporary horror film, the Latin American horror film, they try to recuperate or to use this monstrosity, like this space, kind of like saying, like, okay, yeah, we were the place of the monstrous, so we're going to use that, Mm-hmm. We're going to use that to create horror stories, horror films. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very interesting in some ways. Is reverting a little bit, like this colonial naming, or this colonial construction of Latin America, the place of the barbarous, for example. Mm-hmm. And then these directors, they use images like that are very recognizable. For example, the cannibal. Mm-hmm. This Mexican film that I was talking a little ago, like We Are What We Are. It's a movie about Mexican cannibals. Mm-hmm. And if we take into account that the idea of the cannibal was created by Europeans, but in America, so we can see how in some moment it was like term or like an image created to undermine what Latin America is, it became, or it's transformed in something that it could like empower or like show, like, okay, yeah, if they say that we are cannibals, we're gonna show that we are really, really cannibals, no? And we can create like this idea of monstrosity. You know, so I think that in one side we have that, like this reclaiming that monstrosity, that American monstrosity, but at the same time, using a lot of these, I don't know, I will say this encyclopedic horror, like knowledge of horror, not precisely because audiences and directors, they are so familiar with American horror, with European horror, with Asian horror. You can see a lot of that in the films, in some of the films that I work in the book. No, for example, a lot of contemporary Peruvian and Colombian horror cinema, they are really, really influenced by Asian horror. For example, by what it's called J-horror, Japanese horror, or Korean horror. No, so you can see the influence. No, so you can see that, yeah, a lot of the monstrosities that are appearing are connected with these Japanese or Korean or European or American monsters, but at the same time they reflect problems that are like very, very particular to Latin American contexts.
Since you bring that up, actually, I'm curious, how much influence have European and Asian immigrants into Latin America had on the horror industry versus more indigenous or more, Spanish natives of Latin America?
Yeah, I will say that maybe the horror that was produced maybe in the 60s and 70s in Latin America, even 80s, it's a little more connected with, I don't know, the gothic horrors, obviously with their particularities, but very influenced by the Hammer films, or like Universal films. Lately, maybe in contemporary horror, Asian, for example, like what I was telling you before, Asian horror film, Japanese horror is really, really important for Latin American directors. And it's a very particular interpretation and representation of this, because you can see ghosts that, for example, I work a movie that is called Kilometer 31st. It's a Mexican film about the Llorona, like this, the weeping woman.
Okay.
That it's a very Latin, Pan-American, you'll say, like ghost. But it's about that this very particular ghost from Latin America and from Mexico, but the way that they represent the ghost is very Japanese. It's very recognizable as the way that Japanese filmmakers portrayed the female ghosts. So you have like this mixture of elements that probably immigrants, like actual people, are connected with that, but it's also these migrations, and in that sense, that's why the book is making an emphasis on, these migrations have to do with people, but also it's a migration of cultural products, because weirdly in some countries in Latin America, it's easy for cultural products to enter and to access the culture than the actual people, So yeah, I mean, I will say like and obviously I can't generalize, but there's a lot of influence from Japanese and more contemporary American horror in the directors. And for example, what you were saying about, for example, indigenous influences, you can see that not in all the production in Latin America, but you can see it, for example, in what it's called Andean or horror. That it's like films produced mainly in Peru and Bolivia.
Okay.
So these are movies that are trying to dig into the indigenous in the indigenous past and finding horrors and monsters that they could be more connected with the traditions of the indigenous people from Bolivia and from Peru. Mm-hmm. It's going very well. Some of the films, for example, before what I was telling you, that I worked some very low budget films. Some of these Peruvian films are very low budget, but they started opening. They started opening like the door for like some other directors with a little bit more budget, with more experience in filmmaking. Mm-hmm. They start opening the door for them to get interested in this, no? So we have like really low budget films, but also movies that are like getting like better special effects, a better narrative, better camera, no? So this is a phenomenon that it's growing, no? It's growing in Latin America, specifically in the Andean region.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are there other significant issues that you cover in the book that we haven't talked about yet that you might want to bring up?
I mean, maybe what I would like to stress is like the important the connection between the histories of Latin America and the horror films, no? Because it is something that I talk with I tell my students all the time, not like horror films, yeah, they are, it's entertainment, of course, and sometimes they seem to be completely disconnected with reality, but they are very highly political, no? So in many of these films, you can see the remnant of history, of the historical events of things, political issues that are happening in the country, in a particular country, in a particular time. Mm-hmm. You know, for example, a lot of the films that are made in Argentina are connected with gore, or they are like movies that you can fit into the slasher subgenre or the gore subgenre. Mm-hmm. No, and if we analyze that, I mean, it's not random, you know. I mean, we are talking about countries that in the 20th century they had very, very painful and bloody dictatorships. Mm-hmm. You know? So many of these films, indirectly, I mean, more or less indirectly, they are talking about this, no? So there are movies that maybe that's not the most important topic that they are treating, but you can find that. No, you can find that, and you can see how political, like how interested these directors are in talking about politics and history. And it's something that sometimes like audiences they are not expecting, you know.
Mm-hmm. So now I'd like to ask about how you did your research. I assume you watched all these films, you know, a few times over. Did you? Mm-hmm. Yeah, tell me about that. You know, your research for this. What'd you do?
Yeah, I mean it's a very fun research because, as you are saying, I watch the films. You know, I really have to watch the films obviously more than once, sometimes maybe 2 or 3 times. And then I will have to go back, not to specific parts of the film, to make sure that what I'm thinking about it is what is happening, you know. Mm-hmm. And of course, what I'm doing it's an exercise of interpretation, but at least to make sure that my interpretation works with what the director is trying to portray. Mm-hmm. So it's a visual an analytical approach to the film, and then after I do that, I start kind of like going deeper into literature and into theory that helps me understand some of the things that I'm seeing. No, so for example, when I was working with Argentinian films, I really had to do a very deep research into the Argentinian dictatorships and the history of Argentina in the second part of the 20th century. To really understand some of the things that I was seeing and some of the reference, precisely because it's not a historical thing, precisely because it's not a drama, it's not apparently a political film. So some of these references they tend to be very subtle. So in that sense, you watch the film several times, and then there is a moment when I go into researching history, researching literature, researching references. And all of this helped me to kind of make the connections that I want to make.
Did you have any trouble finding, maybe lesser well-known films? Do you have trouble accessing any films you wanted to get your hands on, or how was that?
Yeah. That could be an issue when you're doing this from the United States. When I travel to Latin America, I try to inform, to see which movies I'm going to be able, for example, to buy in DVD or in Blu-ray or something like that. And sometimes I have to really go deep into the internet trying to find films, because sometimes they could be very difficult. And for example, some of these films from the Andean horror, they could be very difficult, because some of these films were only showed in Peru. And not even in Lima, not even in the capital. Some of these films were shown in a community cinema in a very small town in the mountains of Peru. So fortunately, there's more and more people interested in this, and in Latin America, there's people that are putting some of these films, or at least fragments of obscure films on the internet. But obviously, sometimes the quality is not great. The sound is horrible. So some of these films could be a little bit complicated to find. These ones that are a little bit more obscure. Obviously, one of the films, the Guillermo del Toro films that I work, is The Shape of Water. So my research for that film, it was going to the cinema and watching the movie, and that was very, very nice and very easy, let's say. But some other films is a little more complicated to find them. And obviously, and also, because some of these films, sometimes they take a little bit of time to the companies, they take the producers and the companies that are making these films, they take a little bit of time to put them on a DVD format, for example. And some of them could be very jealous of the copyrights on the internet. So these are careful, let's say. They could be very careful with the copyright. So sometimes it takes me days to find a film that I can comfortably watch.
Did you start with a list of films and stick to that, or did you, as you researched, discover other not so well known films that you said, I think I want to look at that one too?
Yeah, I try to be as informed as I can about new movies coming out in Latin America. And I try to keep in contact with friends in different places that they can tell me there's a movie coming, I try to be well informed. But some of the encounters are I don't know, serendipitous, in the sense that I'm looking for something, and then I found a web page that is talking about this other movie that I say this will be great to have, or at least this will be great to reference, And fortunately, the number of films, of the horror films in Latin America, is not insignificant, but again, it's not as big as for example, the European or the American tradition. So in that sense, it's a little bit easier to keep track. And for example, there's more and more people interested in these kind of films in Latin America. So, for example, there's bloggers that they are trying to keeping people well informed about happening in horror. And there's like more and more festivals, cinema festivals that they specialize in this kind of films. So, for example, in Argentina, there's a very famous one that it's called Buenos Aires Rojo Sangre, like Buenos Aires blood, red or red blood. And there's one in Bogota, in Colombia, that is called Cinema Zombie. So there's a big community of people that are like trying to keep these films moving around, you know. But as I was telling you before, yeah, there's like some of these films that they reach like really small audiences. So those are the really difficult to find.
Yeah. So apart from getting to watch all these movies, was there a part of the research, apart from that was very enjoyable? Maybe some films that you hadn't seen before that you really liked, or, you know?
Yeah. I mean, when I was doing this research, when I was starting the research, like a couple of years ago, I discovered this Andean cinema that I was talking about, and it was very nice to find. You know, it was very nice to see that there's directors in Peru and Bolivia that are like getting interested in film, in the indigenous and Andean traditions. You know, because sometimes when some directors in Latin America focus on these kind of traditions, I don't know, they try to make films that they will look a little more like documentaries, you know, or kind of like a curiosity or like a folkloric film, you know. So it was really nice for me to see, very enjoyable for me to see that some of these directors are really taking these stories to a different level. No, they are like really trying to create atmospheres and create a cinematic space that really can scare audiences, contemporary audiences. No, because I don't know if you're an audience that you are used to watch really elaborated American films, horror films, no? So obviously a film that is talking about a specific folkloric monster. No, it's not gonna have the same impact that an American film will have. No, so in that sense, the effort that these directors are trying to put these movies, to make these movies completely competitive in a global market. For me, that was very, very interesting, no, to see that it is possible. Not because that is the goal. You know, it's great to have like films that are like more local, and you know, but it's good to see that there's also other things that are like saying like, look, in Latin America we have these things. We have these particular monsters, you know, that they could be as scary as any other monsters in some other places, you know.
What did you find that was most surprising as you did your research?
Surprising, how political these films could be, because one thing is, I don't know, to watch George Romero's films, you know, and see like, oh yeah, the zombies represent X, Y, or Z, you know. But I would like to see how many of these films are really good at talking about political issues, and in some cases things that are not very accepted in the specific societies, you know. So it was surprising for me to see how, because I had that idea, you know, and it was something that I was thinking and I was seeing in other cinematographies, but it was great and surprising to see how effective they could be, you know, and how even if it's not the preferred genre in Latin America, it's growing, and it's kind of like surprising audiences, because some people go and watch the film and say like, oh, you know, that was a good scary movie, and maybe I can think a little bit about like this or that specific social issue, or specific part of the history of my country. No, so that was a pleasant and a good surprise for me.
Was there a particularly difficult issue that you were trying to research? Maybe some kind of some symbolism or something that you just couldn't quite get a grasp on and finally did, or maybe still haven't?
Maybe how to put all of these films together, because I'm working in different countries, with different and particular stories, because Latin America, we share a language, we share a lot of cultural traditions, but we are very, very different, like an Argentinian could be incredibly different from a Mexican, and the histories of the countries are very good. They could be very different. So in that sense, it was a little bit of a challenge to put all of these things together in a way that it makes sense. In a way that I was saying, like, okay, the book is going to have a flow, and the person that is reading is not going to think that I'm crazy and that I'm connecting things that doesn't have anything to do with like in between them, So other than geography, because of course, if I'm writing a book about Latin American cinema, obviously I'm gonna use movies from different places, but it was a challenge, kind of like to make sure that these movies were connected somehow, that they were like, that the reader could find that, oh yeah, this movie from this place, it's somehow connected with this movie from this other country, So that was a challenge. I hope that I did it well at the end. So yeah, but it was a challenge, and also being from Latin America, and knowing that it's something that I can't be, I cannot take the easy route, that I have to really do like an effort trying to say, like, this is something that we share, but there's also a ton of things that we don't share.
Did any of the films that you saw, did any of them emotionally move? Was there one that emotionally moved you stronger than the others in some way?
That's a very good question. Let me think. One of them. Maybe a film that I really like, and it moved me mostly to laugh, and to have a great time. It's Vampires in Havana. That is this film that I told you that is from the 80s, 1985. It's horror, but it's also comedy, So it's a great film that is imagining what happened if that there were vampires in Havana, in the under the tropical sun, So it's a movie that, exactly. Every time that I watch it, it makes me laugh, and makes me think more and more about not only about the bizarreness, or like how bizarre is that someone could think that vampires can survive under the Caribbean sun, but also the amount of implications that it have for the gothic genre and for the horror cinema. So it's a great film that every time that I see it, it makes me happy. And maybe a good surprise, it was The Shape of Water. It's a really, really pretty film. I enjoy it very much. And I think that's a film that is showing, I think that it's a not very pretentious film, in the sense that, like, it's Del Toro doing what he wanted to do. So it was a very nice surprise, and it moved me, the fact watching the movie, but also hearing Del Toro saying that this is a movie that he wanted to do since he was a kid. Like this idea of this director that is profoundly in love with monsters, and that he was saying, like, I was sick that, like, the monster was always alone, or like the monster had to become something else in order to get the girl, No, so it was very very good to hear hear him saying like, okay, the only way that I'm gonna get this is if I make the movie. So I'm gonna make the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what do you hope the book will do?
I hope that the book will be good informing audience, like readers, about the diversity of films, of horror films that we have in Latin America.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as I'm telling you, it's not a huge industry, but it's an industry that is there. It has been there since the 20s, probably. And it's growing. Also showing that this is something that we are, like Latin American directors are working in. It's there, and also showing how, again, how political this genre could be, mm-hmm. And how good could be, like giving audiences the information that is going to be productive when thinking about like history or political processes. No, so I hope that the book is able to do that. No, so to show the things that are happening in contemporary, some things, because of course I can't cover all the films that have been made in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years. Mm-hmm. But some of these films, and also showing that it's a very political genre.
Okay. Can you talk to any difficulties you had in finishing or getting the book published and how you overcame those?
I mean, it's the book is coming, is filed with Macmillan, and unfortunately I had like really good editors that they have been working with me since the very beginning. No, and I mean in that sense I feel very, very lucky to have like an editorial team that always have been helping me and listening, and because it's really, it could be a difficult process. No, and I mean this is my first book in English. No, I published two. I have other two in Spanish, mm-hmm. but this is my first book in English. So it was like a little more difficult. No, obviously it's not. It's my second language, and I feel very comfortable with it. But it's different. No, it's like another experience to sit and write something in your second language. No, so that was it was a difficulty, but it was also a challenge. Mm-hmm. To be able to see it and write it, and then come back and read it like 3 days later and realize that the structure that it was like well written by the structure that I was using, it was more like a structure in Spanish than in English.
Yeah.
So realize that I had to like use more periods, and like maybe this word would have to go in some other place. So it was kind of like a constant revising of my own writing. Mm-hmm. That's part of the process of writing in any language, but it was, I let's say that I feel it a little bit more writing this book, so that was like a difficulty and a challenge at the same time. Mm-hmm. But again, what I'm telling you, fortunately I had a group of editors that they were always very, very willing to listen and to inform me about deadlines and processes, so it was very good to have the editorial group, like my editors, like helping me with that.
Mm-hmm. And getting a publisher, it sounds like you didn't have much of a problem getting a publisher for the concept and idea.
No, fortunately, one of the chief editors, he approached me in a conference maybe 2.5 years ago, and he told me like that they could be interested in a book. So what I did was I sent them like a couple of options, and they picked the one that the product that they thought that it would be like better for Palgrave. No, so it was a very smooth process. Or it has been a very smooth process.
Okay. Do you have another writing project in mind?
Yes, I have a couple that they are still kind of in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, maybe like little things, because I probably this is something that happened to many other writers, but it's like, I don't know, when you're writing, you're always putting on the side like some more like small projects, you know, like little, like tumors of writing, I will say, mm-hmm. that they appear and then you put it to the side. So yeah, I mean, I'm interested, for example, in contemporary American horror,
mm-hmm.
In American Horror Story and all of these shows, mostly on TV, you know, that I think that they are reshaping the way that people approach horror,
mm-hmm.
And in platforms that sometimes are not the traditional format of TV, you know. So for example, that is a topic that really interests me, and at some point it could become like another book, another project, you know.
Mm-hmm. So I assume the book will be on Amazon and online bookstores. Do you have a personal website or social media that people can follow your thoughts or anything?
I don't. I mean, I have my, you know, that's something that I have to work more on. I have been thinking about like having a web page. I still don't have it, but I use Academia, and if people look at me through my name, Gabriel Eljaiek, probably they are going to find me.
Mm-hmm.
And with some academics in Latin America and the United States, we have been trying to work in a web page about like Latin American gothic. No, that's another thing that really interests me. So yeah, there's a Latin American gothic web page. So that's another place that people can take a look. And sometimes I'm writing there, and I'm trying to share a little bit of my thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you say the web address for it is?
www. Latin American Gothic Association .com.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
A long address, but an easy one. Well, that's all.
Yeah. So yeah, that's something that, I mean, with some other academic, we are trying to also create a little bit of like the presence of a Latin American Gothic, like the idea that there is a Latin American Gothic, and it had been happening since the mid-19th century. So and there's many works and books that are like very interested in that. So no, that's also an idea that we have been working on.
Okay, that's all the questions I have. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I think that this was a very good conversation. Again, thank you very much for the invitation.
Yes, thank you for speaking with me. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit chrisalvarez.com or theartofsciencefiction.com for more great interviews, photos, and articles. Your visits help support this podcast. Please remember that my first name, Chris, does not have an H in it. One of the best ways to provide feedback for this podcast is to rate me on iTunes. Please give me a good rating if you liked it, or feel free to give me a bad rating if you didn't. I'll use that feedback to make this a better podcast. You can also follow me on Instagram under Chris Alvarez Sci-Fi, on Facebook under Chris Alvarez WLC, on YouTube under Chris Alvarez WLC, and on Twitter under Chris Alvarez WLC. Thanks for listening, and keep imagining the future.